Hello and welcome to Confidently Wrong, a show by regular dudes talking with confidence about content we have no right to speak about with any kind of authority, but do it anyway. I'm Wesley Nakamura, and as always, I'm joined by award-winning director Brian Redondo and Savon Jones, aka Captain Bonnie. This is episode 134, and we're geeking out over a new animated series on Netflix called Blue Eye Samurai. I'm confident that it's going to be the best show you've ever listened to, and well, hey, if it's not, you can always ask us for a refund.
Incredible!
Hello, gentlemen. Welcome. Savon, it's good to have you back. Brian is in the studio. We're talking
We're
to
in the
each
studio?
other. Yeah, talking.
Really?
Well, we're in a virtual studio talking to each other across the country.
The
we got
studio
the North.
that is America.
What?
Yeah.
What a shitty studio.
Like, it's a good studio. It's just it doesn't live up to its potential. It's like, dude, this place.
Oh, they sold us a bill of goods that were much better than what we actually have. But it's still good. It's still good.
What could be better?
Haters. Well, actually, so we were talking about America, and right before we started recording, we're gonna talk about Blue Eye Samurai on this. I shouldn't say We're gonna talk about Blue Eye Samurai on this show, and a new Netflix show. It's been kind of, I think, a little bit under the radar, but word of mouth is pretty good. So we were really, really excited to dive into it. And then Brian kind of told us, like, hey, my buddy told me about this. Who was your buddy? Give him a shout out.
It was highly recommended by a couple of our diehard confidently wrong listeners. One was my homie Sean.
What's up, Sean?
Writer of comic book City of Walls. And the other is my dance buddy, Dr. Tim Funky Fungus.
Hey!
Shout out to both of them for recommending.
Wah, 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 wah.
Also, Tyler and Kendall brought it up too in some of our to your point about the word of mouth. I also y'all brought it up to me, but in my period of time before watching this, I think y'all brought it up. I think Mike brought it up. Tyler and Kendall both brought it up in our own chat. Like, I had a lot of people out of nowhere. I think a coworker brought it up too. A lot of folks were like, why do I keep hearing about Blue Eyed Samurai? In fact, Kendall mentioned it to me a while
And these are not
back.
like the otaku crowd necessarily.
I mean, like,
So-
we
Yeah,
watch
and
a lot of.
it's a show.
Yeah, what you saying?
It's a show that I don't think was on any of our radars until it dropped and until people started talking about it. And I think that's true for most people, right? It was not like looking forward to this thing that's going to drop and we're waiting with bated breath for this series. It's sort of like it just landed in our laps, and suddenly there's a groundswell of interest.
It's like Squid
with good
Game.
reason.
Mm-hmm. A lot of
Exactly.
Just
Netflix
appeared.
animation, a lot of Netflix shows, for all the issues and woes Netflix has with pumping out really mediocre stuff that they cancel, when they have something really quality, word of mouth usually does a great job of just promoting it organically. Because I think something similar happened with that Castlevania show. I didn't see advertising everywhere, but I just heard people talking about it, gave it a watch, and was like, oh, this shit is fire. So,
And Arcane.
Arcane too. There's a lot of good. Again, all Netflix's woes, when they have a good show, word of mouth does a great job of spreading it. I think because their platform is so huge, even if it's gotten mediocre collectively over the years, like, it has access and eyes on it, and that does a good job of letting the quality speak for itself.
I like how Netflix spends all this money on their algorithm trying to get you to watch something, but the real algorithm is just your buddy telling you that this is a good show.
Yeah, turns
Yeah,
out.
So it's like,
absolutely.
Turns out the
why did they do
And-
all that?
And this show isn't based on some other IP that you're already familiar with.
Mhm.
So it's
Nice.
like all the corporate considerations that they make when greenlighting stuff are just out the window on this one. It's just good.
Yeah.
So watch it.
Yeah.
Terrific. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the thing that we were talking about earlier, and then we'll jump into the show. I think we could spend a couple minutes on this.
Yeah.
So, Sav, we were talking before this about how this show is set kind of in old time Japan, maybe 1800, something like that. It's in a isolationist period for Japan. The gunpowder, firearms are just starting to appear. We don't know how long they've sort of been around in the world, but they're just starting to make their way into Japan. So it's the time of the samurai. It's a time of very martial arts and the time of the emperors and things like that. A very stereotypical time period to kind of illustrate in animation and movies. But then Savon was like, "Oh, Wes, we haven't talked about this." So Savon, what were you talking about?
Yeah, so my question towards Wes was, and I wanted to make sure I asked it in a tasteful, respectful manner, is, we consume a lot of.
I love
He
that
said,
you
"I'm not
softened your
trying to
voice
get
for that.
Yeah, trying to get
canceled."
canceled. You hear me? Look, but yeah, we watch a lot of Japanese and just like Eastern animation and shows, and I was asking Wes, especially for a show like this that is very deeply steeped in Japanese culture, and I think I'm not an expert, but it seems like they do a good job of trying to be authentic, trying to really represent elements of the culture. I asked Wes, hey, you're someone who has Japanese ancestry. What is your relationship to your past heritage across the ocean? How does that relate to how you perceive these shows or how you receive them? And a little bit of from your own family side, what is y'all's relationship to Japanese culture, and does it manifest in your day-to-day life? Does it impact how you view these shows that, again, some of them are more fantastical, but others seem to take a really solid swing at being period active? Like, how does that look and feel to you, if anything?
Yeah, so what we found is that we have a little bit in common in sort of a weird way, right? In terms of our ancestry, me and Savon, because my parents were both born in the U.S. Well, technically, I think my dad was born in a territory, because I don't think Hawaii becomes a state until after he was born, like until he's like 5 or 6 years old.
What year was your dad born?
Yeah, 45.
I think that was
So
right
I
when
think
it
Hawaii
became
becomes a state in 51 or
It
something.
was around that same time.
Something like that.
But yeah. I see what you're saying.
So I think, but whatever. I mean, he's a U.S.
It happened
citizen.
in 59. It happened in 59.
Okay, so I mean, he's already 14 by the time Hawaii officially becomes a state.
Mhm.
I mean, it's functioning as a state already at that point, but it hadn't been fully formalized. My mom was born in California, but then it's different because my grandparents were both born in the U.S. On both sides, and lived most of their life in the U.S. My mom's dad, I think, spent some time in his childhood growing up in Japan. And then, so it wasn't them that were technically like our immigrants that brought our family here. And then my great grandparents would have been the people who traveled here. I never met them. I barely met my own grandparents. They were pretty old, or they had passed away mostly by the time I was born. And so, as far as I can tell, my family started in the U.S. in the early 1900s, like maybe 1908, that kind of time period, so it's 4 generations. Nobody in my family currently speaks Japanese. We don't know anybody who lives in Japan. So our ties to Japan.
Yet you pronounce it samurai?
How would you pronounce it?
Samurai? I don't know.
Oh.
As soon as you started saying,
I thought you were doing a bit.
Whoa.
I thought he was doing a bit for a second. I was like, I'm not going to tell this man how to say
samurai?
it.
Oh, what did you say?
How do you think, bro?
Yo, you tell us.
Yeah, you do us.
What? How do you say Samurai Jack?
Samurai.
Samurai Jack?
I say Sam. Not some like a
Sam.
Sum of goods. Like Sam, like, the name.
Like
all right.
Sam the Eagle.
Or Sam's Club.
Well, Uncle
this
Sam.
This was not something I learned at home, but I did take Japanese in high school and in college from, not my parents, because they don't speak Japanese. And an A in Japanese is pronounced ah, so it'd be samurai. Anyways, neither here or there. Yeah, but that's not something I learned at home. That's something I had to learn at my high school. So there's a lot of we definitely don't have very good context in my family or me personally about what Japan is like, what ancient Japan is like. We don't necessarily carry over many of the cultural traditions. Savon was like, "I never been to your house. Is your house filled with American things? Is it filled with Japanese things?" There are definitely things that are Asian-ish looking in terms of decoration, but for the most part it'll probably look like most American houses, just out there, big couch and we sleep on beds. We don't sleep on a tatami mat like they do in the show. So there's a very surface level, I think, familiarity with Japanese culture, but I couldn't tell you the ins and outs of anything going on there. I just learned that on TikTok or on Instagram, there's this video going around of people saying in Japan they don't consider sleeping with prostitutes cheating. Most people, they're like, "Oh no, because you pay for it. It's just like going to the bar. It's just a transaction. But it's not cheating." And I was like, whoa, that is a very different way of looking at things. So I had no idea. Like, I just not
Wes is
familiar
moving
with
to Japan, folks.
Sorry, Jen. No, yeah.
Had a
So
good run.
no, my familiar with Japanese culture is very limited. I mean, the joke when you're a kid, which is pretty harmful, is that you're like a Twinkie, or that I was a Twinkie,
Goddamn.
because like you're yellow on the outside, white on the inside.
If you're
Really,
black on the inside,
really, I don't know. It's the opposite of an Oreo, I guess, or reverse Oreo.
We're getting into some really just like we're getting into some wild territory.
So there were lots of harmful, ideas out there, and people would say like, "Oh, Wes, like you don't speak Japanese. Like, how sad that you like lost your culture." And I used to agree with that. I was like, "Oh yeah, that is sad." And I was like, "Wait a second, like that was never my culture. My culture is just being American. Like you can't lose something that you never had, So it's interesting that people prescribe how you should be an Asian in America, and so that becomes a thing that like I didn't have language for any of this until I went to college and met people like Brian who were like, "No, bro, that's that's white privilege," and I was like, "What's white privilege?" So like,
oh god, college era
like
West,
that,
I would pay good money. I think.
Oh man, I was so wide open, like what?
that's when he had the Naruto hair.
Yes.
Talk about finding yourself.
Yeah, we had an interesting moment where Savon was also kind of saying similar things in terms of like he doesn't base his identity on having heritage from somewhere else, right? Like for both of us, it seems like we view ourselves as like American first. Our experiences are entirely about growing up in America and the ways that our families have functioned within American society way more than it is about our ties to any other culture.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, similar thing, right? Like obviously the context is different, but I've talked about how, for better or for worse, I grew up in America. That's where all my culture I've taken in comes from. The music, the history, all of my heroes, people like Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, MLK, they're all Americans, right? When I think about the civil rights movement, or even like the Reconstruction era of the 1800s, the Civil War and freeing of slaves, all of like the slave culture and how that impacts a lot of Black American cultures today. To me, that's a uniquely American thing, and that's where a lot of my things, the element of my heritage I'm interested in. So I told Wes, I'm more interested in what my ancestors in the 1800s or even 1700s were up to, less so than what country of origin my ancestors came from. Because, and that's one of the reasons I never did one of those ancestry tests, because yeah, that'd be, I guess, a nice tidbit to know. But that, for me at least, and everyone's different. Some people, that's a very important part of their identity, and I completely understand, because I have friends who are like the opposite, right?
Those things are privacy nightmares. What the fuck?
Yeah, but that's a whole nother can of worms. But it's one of those, for me, knowing what part of West Africa my ancestors came from isn't really a needle mover for my identity. But knowing what my ancestors in the 1800s were up to is a huge needle mover for my identity. So, especially in a show like this that's about culture, background, who you are, what's important to you, and what makes up your identity, it's a fun little side subtopic, right? Because I think a big driving part of the plot of the show, or the characters' own self-actualization, is who they are, what their identity is, and what parts, in really multifaceted
Japanese
ways. What does that mean for you?
Well, also in like what Japanese society, at least as depicted in the show, expected of them, especially of the women in the show.
Mm-hmm.
But even of the men, right? Like there was talk about like what you should do, what is honorable, what is right, blah blah, and all of that was based on these cultural norms that the writers put into the show. And I whether any of that was actually happening or not, I have no idea. I mean, it sounds kind of consistent with what I know about it, but my knowledge is very limited. You could fit what I know probably onto like an index card, this big, and then be done with it. So
there's like this weird expectation for both of you guys, just based on purely on race, purely on how you appear, that maybe both of you have some sort of like connection or cultural connection to all these people and things and cultures that are happening very far away from both of your lives. And that's, I mean, I guess kind of what we're talking about here is that in Blue Eyed Samurai, there are expectations that are just laid on people that do not reflect the reality of those individuals.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun conversation of, what's important to you and what's not and how it matters. Because the flip side is that I know other Black people, Black Americans who did do ancestry tests, go back to Africa, and they say, oh, you're back to where their country of origin most likely was. And they say it was a life-changing experience. So it's there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's everyone's individual journey, but it's a fun, this show in particular, I think piques a very fun topic or a very interesting topic. And I'm glad we get to have this little sub conversation, because that was definitely something that floated in the back of my head, which we'll talk more about with the character show, but there's so many layers to identity, what should be important to you, people being boxed in by their culture, and how that can be an obstacle to self-actualizing that, even if you yourself haven't lived you can't relate entirely to measles experiences, I think it's something we can all look in the mirror and kind of ask ourselves, why is this important to me? Have I reflected on why it's important? How much of it is society's expectations being put on me versus you being on your own journey of what do you care about when you're deciding who you are as an individual? Fun.
Amen. Let's get into the show.
Yeah, buddy.
Blue Eye Samurai. All right, so we said Netflix, created and written by Michael Green and Amber Noizumi. They're a husband and wife team. Michael Green has been a writer. Brian, you said Clouseau movies? Like Death on the Nile.
Right.
Something else, too.
The Murder on the Orient Express.
Oh, yeah.
Those movies with Kenneth Branagh where he's like the
mustache.
Crazy French detective, right?
Okay. And then also, I think a co-writer on Blade Runner 2049 and on Logan. So he's got some chops here in some action spaces, but spaces or movies where they're kind of really exploring identity and like what it means to struggle with the things that like you're dealing with, We've got some cool voice actors in this one. So Maya Erskine, who's normally known for her comedy, she just had a show on Hulu come out like maybe 6 months ago, and then where she plays like a teenager growing up to be, I don't know, 30 or something like that. And then George Takei makes an appearance here. Masioka of Heroes fame from way back in the day.
Buddy.
Welcome back, Masioka.
Our good friend Randall Park from Blockbuster and other shows. What was
Do
his
people
name
know
on
him from
Ant-Man?
Blockbuster? I don't
know.
think that's his claim.
No.
To fame.
Yes.
Oh, the
Come
one
on, he's
show.
in the MCU, man.
The MCU. No, but he's also in the other show. It was like Fresh Off the Boat or something.
I haven't watched Fresh Off the Boat.
Right. That's what he's known for. Fresh Off the Boat.
Okay, Fresh Off the Boat. But Kenneth Branagh is also a voice actor in this one, so there must have been like Michael Green must have talked to him, from his days working with them on those other movies. And then a guy who I recognize his face, but I don't know what he's necessarily from, Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa. Hopefully we're saying that right. I think he was in like Mortal Kombat or something. But
Ooh.
pretty cool actor.
Yeah, and then
So anyways,
Brenda Song too from Disney
animated.
Channel, Sweet Life of Zack
Brenda
and
Song.
Cody.
Sorry, I left her out because I didn't know who she was.
Don't forget Savon's life partner.
Yeah.
Life partner.
Although she's
Yep.
married to your boy from Home Alone, what's the man?
Macaulay
Yeah,
Culkin?
they're married.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Could not
Yes.
be more serious.
Absolutely serious.
Whoa, that's amazing.
Yeah, shout out to
Well,
him.
good for them.
He's winning.
Yeah. All right, 8 episodes, animated, very cool animated style. I think we'll talk about that a little bit. So the main character name is Mizu, skilled, like extremely skilled warrior, European father because they have blue eyes. And apparently in Japan at this time, they tell you in the kind of title cards, like Japan has been isolationist. No one from the outside world is allowed in. And so having blue eyes or being of European descent is really seen as kind of a lower class citizen. They're treated really poorly. I think it is a nice way of saying that. And so she's basically an outcast within this, ancient Japanese society, not ancient, in this old Japanese society. So that's kind of the setup. And did I say she again? It's just, I'm not going to not be able to do it. It's too bad. It's too bad. Sorry. It's a she. We're just going to go with it.
Surprise.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, we're not going to do any other spoilers for a second. So if you haven't seen the show, listen in, because I think it'll be interesting to hear this part before you go watch it, or deciding if you want to watch it. So I really, really love this show. I think I was drawn into the universe, the characters, the action was awesome. We're not getting paid, unfortunately. But what would be your pitch to people who haven't seen the show? Why they should watch it? Like, my pitch would be everybody I've talked to has loved it. I haven't heard a single person who's seen it who just was like, it was fine. Everyone who's watched it has been like, yo, this is awesome. So that would be my pitch. It's pretty wide appeal, I think. As long as you like a little bit of animation and a little bit of action, I think you'd be into it. Brian, what's your pitch?
I'll be honest. So when I first saw the title Blue Eye Samurai, I was like, what? I'm not gonna watch that shit. That sounds like The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. We did that already. We don't need to see some like European guy parading around Japan slicing other Japanese people.
I thought the same
But
thing. I thought the
then,
exact same thing. Like when I heard that,
I totally wrote it off.
Dude, what is this? Do I want to watch something called Blue Eyed Samurai? Like I was acting
Like,
like the
hell no.
natives in the show.
Monsters. But then, with, as Wes said, people were telling me, "Oh, this is good," and then I saw the trailer and I realized that, oh, no, this is a interracial or multiracial person navigating Japan, and it's very different. And I think for me, one of the things that Confident Wrong fan Sean said to me was that this is kind of like Quentin Tarantino Kill Bill Part 1 with like a dash of Disney, like Hunchback of Notre Dame style. And I think that is actually kind of accurate here. I mean, you're getting like the training montages, the apprenticeship, the killing, the revenge storyline, massive amounts of blood, in an art style that is kind of reminiscent of that late 90s period of Disney animation, which is kind of cool to look at. And as Savon pointed out in our pre-show talk, this is kind of maybe a Mulan story a little bit. So I think those ingredients actually make it a really fun watch and worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
Sav,
yeah. So
you got 30 seconds. What's the pitch? Why should they watch this show?
It's an original IP, not based on anything from before. So you're getting a completely fresh story. People always say, "I want something new. I want something fresh." This is exactly that. There might be homages you could say to some other stuff, but this is its own unique characters and taking advantage of the setting. But why you should watch this is this show, intentional or otherwise, is like an homage love letter to anyone who's always liked samurai Edo Japan era like animated stories. So when I watch this show, I get shades of Samurai Champloo in terms of just the traveling town to town, almost little mini individualized stories that have their own things going on, and meeting these unique characters on an episode by episode basis. But it also reminds me a lot of Afro Samurai, where you have this beautiful animation, but again, it's the story of a stoic warrior on a quest for revenge. Like a lot of, and to be clear, a lot of these samurai stories, they're not pretend that they're all just super unique. They all tend to have some very similar overlaps. But if you like Samurai Champloo, if you like Afro Samurai, even shows like Cowboy Bebop, where you're just going town to town, having these episodic adventures with a larger plot, this show does all of that, but with its own unique twist on the characters, the animation, and frankly, just very well done execution. The biggest advantage this show has over some of the others is that, unlike a lot of anime that gets dubbed over, and the voice acting is usually pretty good, this show didn't do any dubbing, period, because it was just made in English natively. And so I think it reflects in a stronger voice acting performance than what you might get from something that's adapted from non-English speakers initially.
Yeah, it was written by Americans, I assume. There isn't much on Amber Noizumi's
I couldn't
record.
find too much.
I think
on
this
her.
is her first show, but
she's
Michael Green is an American.
She's Japanese American, and she says in an interview, I think, that when they had a child, right, and their
Who had
child
blue eyes, huh?
had blue eyes, it was kind of shocking to her, right? Because she was expecting, to see her child look like her, but she actually, looked a little bit different. And I think that was the seedling that would grow into this show.
So let's step back, I think, real quick. Or sorry, I wanted to like talk about some spoilers now. So if you're not convinced to watch this show, keep listening because we're gonna talk about it and break it down. If you are interested in the show, I highly recommend going to watch it first before we talk about it, because I think while we could maybe like give you things to look out for, I think it's way more fun to experience the show just for the first time without knowing anything. Because, like Savon said, it's not based on anything else. It's just a show that they started from scratch. And while it certainly borrows heavily from other things, the way that it's put together obviously is going to be unique in this show. So, I wanted to zero in on one thing, and then we'll kind of zoom back out. So, Mizu, she's set up as this character who doesn't want to make any connections, isn't particularly likable, kind of tells people to fuck off a lot. Extremely skilled, right? As a samurai, as a warrior, but people are drawn to her, but very stoic, right? Like doesn't really show a whole lot, especially in the beginning. There's just kind of this like, well, whatever, like I'm just doing what I'm doing. I'm like, just a very Lone Ranger kind of character here. And there isn't a whole lot to go on for like, why should I like care about this character? But somehow like we keep watching the show. Like what about this show is able to sort of overcome that initial just like kind of almost not I guess lack of personality, lack of pizzazz on the main character? What really draws us in there? Brian, I wanted to see what you thought as someone who's kind of has been in filmmaking. Like how do you design a character that's so kind of one note and then still make us care about the show?
I mean, did you actually think that she was unlikable? Because I
In the
I
beginning, I
immediately
did.
started watching and was like, "Oh, this is a great character. This is a very much an anti-hero character, a noir character. Somebody like a Wolverine or something like that. The lone wolf, right? Lone wolf and cub, also another probably reference point for the show, but a character that is completely about their revenge path, right? And are so good at what they do, basically cutting heads off, and taking names.
Literally just shoop.
Yeah, yeah, just amazing at that aspect of things. Think of John Wick, right? Like this is very much that kind of character. Um, John Wick is trying to avenge the death of his dog. Mizu is trying to avenge the death of her mom. Also, just her life, the life that she has lived as this monstrous outcast, thrown away by the rest of Japanese society in this period. And so when we see her slicing people and doing it so expertly and doing it full-heartedly, nothing else is distracting her, but we also know the reason behind it. I think those two things actually make for a very compelling watch. Somebody who's just expertly skilled, but also really sad and sympathetic because of what they've gone through. And I think John Wick actually is a great analogy. That is kind of what makes it worthwhile and engaging. And because we tease out that little bit of storyline for why they're on this path, we want to know more.
Sav, anything to add? Brian kind of said it. Oh, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
So I'm trying not to sniffle into the mic. No, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Brian said. The biggest thing that made me like Mizu as a character is the balance between them being brutal but not cruel. So even in some of the, especially in the first few episodes, and maybe this will change as I watch, but Mizu really doesn't go for the kill on somebody unless they're actively trying to kill them, or if they actually, that's the main thing, or if they just say something that's just blatantly out of pocket. But even when they're like attacking the dojo, they're brutalizing and beating the crap out of people, but they are very much not going for kill moves. They're going for brutalize you moves, but also they kind of brought it upon themselves by not just meeting that request of, hey, let me talk to y'all master, just to make things easier. So what I like about the character is that, and to your point, Brian, almost Wolverine energy of, I will tear you up, but I'm not just a vicious killer who's just taking lives for no reason either. But damn, if I need to take a life, I am damn good at it. That alone was really fun to watch. And then for me, the characters just, I like the characters when you learn about their backstory, just the internal conflict, the self-hatred piece, them being solely motivated by revenge. To me, that already opens up to an interesting character arc of, hey, this is not a sustainable way to live your life. Living just for revenge and nothing else over societal perceptions of why you should be ashamed of yourself and hate yourself and all of that is a very unhealthy way to view yourself and to live life. And it's clear to me that that's going to be a part of them, their own growth and journey. I think acceptance and self, like we said earlier, self-actualizing. So for me, just the way that they set it up in the first episode made me interested in this character because there's a lot of room for character development. They're going to lose some fights. They're going to get their ass beat. They're going to take some L's in this story of revenge because that's how a lot of revenge stories go. It's a question of what is going to what is this character going to want beyond revenge? Because we know chances are they are going to get their revenge. And that's why I've always been a fan of these stories is what do you do once you get what you have? They've even said, I don't want happiness. I want, what is it? I want, it's not acceptance. It was, they want satisfaction, not happiness. And I'm like, oof, that's a bar. Let's see where your journey goes. So I like the character quite a bit. And I was a big fan of them right from the bounce just because, yeah, they're not cruel, but they are brutal.
And we didn't even emphasize the biggest clincher or the biggest key ingredient that makes this fresh and original is just the very fact that Mizu, our protagonist, is hiding both as somebody with blue eyes, right?
Biracial.
So Mizu wears literal rose-colored glasses to cover that up, and is posing as a man, posing as a samurai. And so those two things, just the hidden identity quality of this character set in this time period in a genre, a samurai genre that is rife with cliche, suddenly is fresh and new because we have this unique original perspective that I personally haven't seen before.
Yeah, like there's so many lines with someone like one of my favorite lines in the show was when the four fangs came up to Mizu and calls him out and says, "We know who you are. We know what you're hiding. You can take those off." And initially, like, yeah, they're talking about the whole blue eyes because you're biracial and all this, but then we, the viewer, also knows, shit, you think you know everything, but the layers, like the character's whole thing is, yeah, to your point, Brian, they're trying to hide their identity, but there's so many layers of their hidden identity that it's like even when they're quote unquote exposed for who they are, it's like not really. Which again, I'm excited. That's gonna play. I'm only 5 episodes in. There's more, and they want to do a season 2, but that's gonna become a factor too with other characters, and I can't wait to see how all of that. Like this show is just a masterclass in intersectionality and how your different elements of your identity impact who you are, and then this character just has to deal with so. Yeah, this is just a great like case study of what intersectionalism looks like, or intersectionality looks like. So I'm yeah, it's dope.
Nice. So I think the show does a lot of things really well. Like stepping back, kind of judging it on the whole, you could say like, oh, there's great action sequences. The story is kind of is pretty compelling. The characters are kind of layered on. Episode by episode, we learn more and more about them. What is it that stands out to you in terms of the show? Like, where is its strengths lie? To me, I think number one for me is the action. I think anytime there's an action sequence, a fight sequence, whatever. And I know like, yeah, okay, it's animated. So you don't necessarily have to play by the rules of like, well, that human has to physically go from point A to point B and do the things, right? But there's just like an intensity of these action sequences that makes sense. Yes, there's brutality. Yes, there's like a lot of gore and blood and stuff, but I appreciate the way that it happens. It's so much more like stylized, I think, than something like Invincible, where it's like the brutality is the point. Like, oh, like I stuck my hand through your chest and grabbed your beating heart out and like pulled it out and we just stare at the beating heart over and over again. It's like, that's not what it is. It's just like, oh, we have to see the like speed and I don't know what to put it. It's just like the like craziness. Skill. Yeah, it's just like the skill, and every action scene or every action like shot is made to highlight these different fighters and how skilled they actually are, right? And like, you know, we've seen things like this before, but it's like, you know, someone gets sliced in the neck and nothing happens for a second, and we're like, oh, what's gonna, you know, and then all of a sudden you just start to see small bloodline trickle out, and then right, like that person, you know, starts bleeding out heavily. Someone gets their like head sliced in half, and you know, just like a movie would do, that it kind of like slides off, right? There's this like slow motionness to it because there's just inertia of the body. And so it's just like how fast they're getting their sword to go, how much strength and technique they're using, illustrated by these action sequences that do include a lot of gore. So that's what has really bothered me, and I think that's like one of the huge highlights of this show. And it's not that it's never been done before. I think these guys just do it on a really high level, and the ways that they get their characters to move and use their environment is just, it's pretty deep. It's pretty cool. So I'm into it, and it's cartoonish, but it doesn't feel too cartoonish, if that makes sense. I don't know. Sav, what do you like highlighting about this show that feels like there's really a strength they're relying on?
The biggest one is that the show's general art style almost reminds you of like old style Japanese artwork and like painting style. So when you see the characters and like even the women in the traditional Japanese makeup and like the geisha style stuff, it just all has a very authentic feel to it. For me, it's the art direction in general for the episode. You know, when even when it manifests in the dialogue, like normally sex scenes aren't really something that I'm super into, but there's a scene when I think Taigen is having sex with his wife after he's lost the duel and he's having this honor crisis, and she like has a whole allegory about fighting the blue-eyed samurai, but she uses that to help initiate sex and try to win him over and calm him down and all of this. And like, as for normally what could just be a very gratuitous sex scene, it actually was like well done character development and you understanding how this character tries to push so and so's buttons to win them over. And it was just very, yeah, very well done. I think the big thing, like, I agree with most of you saying about the choreography and fighting action sequences, but what I'm most entertained about is just a lot of the non-action scenes are very just fun and engaging to watch. Like the sequence where they're at the festival where everybody has to strip naked and jump into the freezing lake to then grab the baton to grant their wish. All of that was, and I don't know how much of that, I don't know enough about Japanese culture to know the actual historical roots of all that, but it was a really fun sequence to watch, and it was very well executed, despite having a bunch of, or because it used nudity in a very non-sexual but still engaging way that I was like, oh, all these new, like, it felt like a real,
There was a lot of flapping batons in
yeah,
that scene.
but it felt like a fun, just slice of life cultural piece that I was watching, and I'm like, I don't know what it is about this that's so engaging to watch, but I'm enjoying this as much as I'm enjoying Mizu having a cliffside fight with 4 badasses with multiple swords, you know, like, that's what's getting me. These types of shows that are action oriented that can keep you super engaged just off the dialogue. Or, you know, when you have the older caretaker just talking to the girl who's played by Brenda Song, the princess, I think Akemi, and, you know, their whole relationship of saying, I've always known you. And he tries to put her through the ringer to win her over and get her to give up on this stuff. Like, or just the focus on how women are put into a box and certain people are very self-aware about how this drives characters. Like, for me, it's the non-action and sequences that keep me super engaged, that makes me enjoy the action sequences more, because I don't feel like, oh, let's fight, let's get back to the fighting. I'm like, oh no, I want to see these characters engage and talk, because it makes the action sequences feel that much better. So they're doing a great job of making me just care about all of the non-combat characters. You know, I didn't think that Princess, is it Akemi?
Yeah, Akemi.
Yeah, I didn't think that she would be one of my favorite characters. But just watching this non-fighter character navigate this world parallel to some other characters who are absolutely, and frankly with Mizu, who's on a parallel-esque journey in certain ways, but is a combat badass, they juxtapose well against each other, and it makes the very long episodes really work. Because I would have thought a show like this would have shorter episodes, but some of these episodes are 45 minutes to an hour on average. You can't have that only be fighting sequences. A lot of it is just character dialogue or characters just doing training or inner reflection sequences, and it works really well. That's not easy to do.
I think one thing too I wanted to add, this doesn't go away from your point at all, just the action sequences are also, or the fight scenes are also storytelling and character building, right? And so it's not just action for action's sake, but it does move the story along and it's part of the story, but I think you learn about the characters by how they fight, how they conduct themselves in a fight, and the ways in which they move. I have a bad memory, so I can't think of anything in particular. Just
I
like
think
in
the
the first
dojo scene, right?
episode,
Like the dojo scene's the
Yeah, the
best
dojo
example.
scene is
like,
perfect example.
yeah, and she takes his top knot, right? Like, which is, I guess, a big deal, but she does it like super clean cut, right? Like, I mean, the character even remarks like, "Holy cow!" Like, it was this. I stood still and they like razor bladed me for it. Um, you know. So I don't know. Yeah, it was very cool. I wasn't doing anything in particular there, Brian. Just my hand got stuck.
Well, when you thumbs up on camera, suddenly a balloon emoji thumb
Did it?
popped up, and I wanted to try to activate that also. It's not happening for
it's
me.
No,
Is it still happening for me? It has to do with like FaceTime is doing this. Anyways, we're getting off track. ADHD in full effect here, guys. All right. Brian, did you want to add in some things about like what you notice is like the strengths of the show that it's leaning on?
Well, I want to add like a couple more examples to both of the things that you guys are talking about. One, with every fight scene is different in this show. They're all really well choreographed fights. These and the way that it's shot, I mean shot in quotes, for this anime, you know, like a lot of like 360 camera movements while Mizu's spinning around fighting multiple people. But as you mentioned, juxtaposed usually with something else that is more about the story, something completely left field, like you mentioned the baton chase that's happening simultaneously to the fight. Savon, you probably haven't seen the episode yet, where the whole episode has a shadow puppet or puppet, not shadow puppet, but puppet theater story playing out while the episode is also playing out, and then they parallel each other, and that's incredible. Another fight that happens in a future episode is basically a video game fight as Mizu tries to go level to level to reach the boss at the top, and every level offers something ridiculous and crazy, and feels very much like a video game in the best possible way.
You even get sent back to level 1.
Yeah, spoiler.
Right?
And then on the other side of that, right, like the Mizu's arc, her revenge story is happening. Mizu is fighting against the patriarchy, I guess. She's fighting against the station in life that she's given by living, by pretending to be something that she's not exactly, right? That she's not permitted to be. Similarly, that goes back to Akemi's story, Princess Akemi's story, who also is trying to defy the constraints around women in that society, but doing it in a totally different way, right? She uses her wiles, her sex and sexuality as tools to be able to evade the things that are forced upon her and try to find some wiggle room, trying to find her own freedom in that world. And I think she has an incredible arc. And to me, like, those things that we're talking about is really what makes the show sing, is that, it's not just about the blood and violence. It's not just about the killing that happens in the show. It's all the other things that are happening outside of that, right? Alongside of it, that really make it something more than just, standard samurai fare, cliche after cliche. They've really channeled something else, and brought a lot of fun ideas and executed at a high level to make something that is both really entertaining but also really smart.
Nice. So I want to start wrapping up a little bit. What would there be anything like you'd change, or you're like, I feel like it just kind of wasn't quite as strong in these other areas? I think this is not necessarily a weakness of the show. I think they chose right in that they really focused in on Akemi and they really focused in on Mizu. And those are our two characters that, like you said, are sort of being juxtaposed against each other given their different skill sets. But also given that they live in the same society and are sort of constrained by similar expectations. But I wish there was just a little bit more drawn out or like developed with some of the other characters, especially someone like what's his name? Who's
Ringo,
the helper
Tigan,
friend?
Ringo.
Yeah,
Ringo.
Ringo. Like really wanted to know a little bit more about Ringo, and then I really actually wanted to know more about the sword maker. I know I felt like he was like this wise old owl. He was able to give sage advice and whatever, but we didn't really get to see like where he comes from and how he brings his experiences into the picture. And that's fine. I don't think it was necessarily a mistake that they didn't do that. I think I just found myself wanting to know a little bit more about some of these other characters so that they weren't so flat in terms of their approach. And I think it would have also been not nice. It would have been helpful to have a little bit more, I think, information either through characterization or action or story, like even flashbacks on the main villain, Abijah Fowler, who's kind of going to be the main villain in this first season. So I think if they could have, it would have been nice if we had that built in somehow. But at the same time, I wouldn't want it to get bloated. I think you could get distracted by doing too much of that, and then lose kind of the momentum and energy of the season. And I think if they had considered some of those things, they erred on the side of let's keep it moving, let's keep the energy up and the momentum going, and that was probably the right choice because this show works from episode 1 to 8, all the way through. Sav, is there anything so far where you've been like, ooh, I kind of wish they would do this, or I'm kind of missing some of the pieces here?
No, I have no notes about what this show can be doing different or better. I'm not done with the show, so most theoretical complaints, they might address it in the later episodes. Other than that, I'm just loving that this show is a breath of fresh air. It's new, but it has familiar things that still draw me in. Like, they always even the Four Fangs, like, oh, is this just a team of badasses that we know this character's going to slay, but it's going to be a dope fight? Cool. Have I seen this before in a bazillion other shows where they send a group of badasses to fight the protagonist? Yes. I don't care. The execution was great.
I don't care.
There's a lot of stuff that's like, to your point, yeah, you've probably seen versions of this and other stuff. I don't care. The fresh stuff is fresh enough to where I'm drawn in, and the execution so far has been good enough to where it's okay you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like I said this before, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It just needs to be a damn good tire. You know what I mean?
Well, I like that there's like nuance too to these characters, and there isn't just like two sides, right? There's a built-in like, ooh, yes, this is how your situation is playing out, and this is how your situation is playing out. And like, yes, there's things in common, but yes, you also see things a little bit differently. And the characters are starting, they in the beginning, they're like, we're enemies. And then as time goes on, it's like, oh, we're not quite enemies. We actually see things very similarly, but not all the way the same. And then there's like a love triangle, sort of, but like not really. And
oh, damn it.
It's sort of
okay. So that does confirm some thoughts I had.
There's a lot of complexity.
Spoiled.
I don't think they hide the ball on that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm not done yet.
I don't think that's like a spoiler.
There's no hiding the baton either.
No hiding the baton. They show it. Peeking through the good old clothes there.
But even the villains in this, right? Their motivations and also their agendas are a little bit fluid, and kind of leave you guessing as to what's actually going to ultimately happen. And I love the fact that it really ramps up too, right? Even though Mizu's on a particular revenge quest, the agenda of the villains is kind of grand, and so that all culminates by the end of the season.
Yeah, but it's all said and done. I don't have any. Like, I would be nitpicking if I said, "Oh, I don't like this particular thing about the show." I watched it and I've been drawn in and I've been thoroughly entertained. And the creators themselves said that this story is set up for multiple seasons. So they said if there's enough interest, they already have season 2 planned out. So some of this is I'm not gonna judge them for
bring
what
it
could
on.
be
I want season 2.
something they want to do in their bigger picture storytelling. As long as it's entertaining, I'm here to watch it every step of the way. The biggest thing though is that if you're just not actually I want to highlight one more strength of the show. I like when
I love it on a question about like what are some weaknesses.
Sorry, I gotta
like let me get one more strength.
Too many strengths.
I don't have any real complaints. I'm not gonna make up a complaint.
No,
I'm not gonna make up a
I think
complaint.
people are gonna want to watch it. People
My biggest challenge is that I work too hard.
Right? I care too much. No, but we talked about the nudity a lot, but I
The
like
noodles.
when shows can have balanced, tasteful nudity that fits what actually is happening in the scene. And so while there is a lot of nudity and sex in this show, never does it feel gratuitous. It always feels as if it makes sense for what's happening in the plot. Like there are scenes that take place in brothels and sex shops and all of that. And yes, you see a lot of full-on nudity and stuff, but it doesn't feel like you're like watching like a softcore porno. It feels like they're trying to, like when characters are talking, they're making a point about how men have hidden desires and these brothels can help people express themselves in ways that they wouldn't otherwise. So you're having like these brothel scenes, but it, to your point, Brian, when you said earlier, it's done with intention. It's not just a, hey, let's put some titties on the screen and call it a day. There's male nudity, there's woman nudity, there's sexual nudity, there's non-sexual nudity. And that to me just shows that they have
There's octopus nudity.
yeah, but even that stuff, like, right? They showed it off screen in a way to make the point, but not just be gratuitous, because they could have, based on all the other stuff they showed, they clearly are having restraint of what are we going to display openly on screen? What are we going to leave more to the imagination? So to me, that just shows that there's a lot of maturity and restraint in the directing and animation of the show, because it doesn't feel like how Game of Thrones would get sometimes, where I feel like this is just our nudity shock scene quota rather than no, there's nudity, but it actually paints a picture in a way that helps you understand the world or even progresses the plot.
I think you could have argued the same for Game of Thrones.
I think
but
Game of
I hear you.
Thrones got to a point where you just had graphic depictions of like sexual assault that's like, this doesn't need to be shown on screen to make the point that you're trying to make. So it feels more like you're just trying to shock the audience rather than, like, I never had shock value nudity. Like I said earlier, there's a scene where two characters have sex and it's on screen, but they don't show gratuitous nudity, but it's more about their relationship, and that worked really damn well rather than just, hey, let's show them smashing because we're Netflix and we can get away with it and let's call it a day.
Any notes, Brian? Any things you
Yeah,
wish
I
they
got
did a little
notes. Of
differently?
course, I got notes.
He's an award-winning director.
There's always notes.
Okay.
Midway through the season, there's a big reveal about Mizu's backstory. And that, to me, really changes, or should change, her revenge path. And it's a little bit confusing and hard to think through, like, how, wait, so she continues just like
Yeah.
unchanged, and it kind of defies expectations of what you'd imagine for somebody dealing with this kind of weight, but then new information changes that. And so that to me was a bit of a struggle to overcome, just logically of like what was happening. And it was one of those things where you're like, okay, now I gotta like talk it out. I talked it out with Anna, and we like came up with all these reasons of why it would be logical for Mizu to continue. But it required us to do the heavy lifting on our parts to make it real, rather than the show giving us a little bit more as to why. But on the flip side of that, I will say at the very end of the last episode, there's another reveal, and I think that reveal helps make it more palatable. But at the same time, you're like, Mizu didn't know that until just then. So then what?
Yeah.
So
I'm excited to see what it is.
there's some of that going on here, but you know, the rest of the show is so good and the characters are so interesting that, you know, I give them a pass. I'll give them a pass on that. You know,
Ooh, a
because
pass.
you just want to see where the show goes next. And oh boy, it's going somewhere really cool. It sounds like, at least.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited for season 2. I hope it comes before 2028. Like, where is Arcane season 2? Is that ever gonna happen? Where is it?
Didn't they release a new trailer? Maybe not.
It's coming out like late 2024, I believe.
Oh, okay. It takes time to make excellent animation.
I mean, I'm still holding on to my draws.
I want it now.
I mean, I'm still holding on to my draws for GTA 6 in 2025.
Oh
So
my god.
another reason to keep on pushing.
On the PS6.
Yeah.
All right, y'all, we gotta stay
When I'm
alive.
50 years old.
All right. I think we should wrap it up there. Are there any last minute thoughts before we do that?
I just want to know how often, Wes, in your life you have pretended to be a samurai.
When I was a kid, I definitely had like one of those plastic toy swords that you get at like the carnival. I used to like fling that thing around all the time, but I don't know. I think I did karate as a kid, and there was definitely some people who had swords, and so we would see the demonstrations of like sword technique. And that was kind of cool that you had they set up these like mats, like wooden, no, not wooden mats, like straw mats, and then they would roll them up and it'd be like that's like the density of like a human arm or something, or I don't know, whatever. And then you would see the guys try, or the guys and gals like try and slice it, and sometimes they wouldn't because like it's a pretty thick amount of material to get through. And then you'd see then they'd bring out the like better people and they'd demonstrate and it'd be like shink, and you'd be like, whoa, all right. And they would do it fast and
Whoa.
be like, boom, boom, boom. They do 3 cuts before it fell. So you're like, okay, well, I could see that skill. And then you kind of translate that to the animation. You're like, okay, well, like that's another level of skill even above that. So, I don't know. Cool.
That's cool. I would pay to see that.
Right?
Yeah. All right, friends. Hit us up at confidently_pod on Instagram. Let us know what you thought of this episode. What did you think of Blue Eye Samurai? If you've seen it, if you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. We all loved it. Everybody we've talked to loved it. Your mom loves it. It's going to be great. Friends, we're out here. See you later. Bye.
Don't talk about my mom.